Who's hanging young hero besides your head and spirit? That soul is saying something profound, so let them hear it.
Welcome to Giant Sized Violence, a Toku Comics podcast. I'm Tommy Trimbath, and today we're joined by comic writer and Eisner Award-nominated editor David Mariotte. If you're a fan of this show, then David has almost definitely worked on a property you love in some capacity. They have a long history with the Transformers comics published under IDW, working as an editor across the line, and as a writer on Transformers Wreckers, Tread and Circuits, as well as the incredible Transformers vs. Terminator crossover. If you're more of a fan of the books we cover on Transcending Comics, well, David also worked as an editor and occasional writer on the IDW Sonic comics, which are statistically right up your alley. Tokusatsu lovers, though, will definitely appreciate their editing work across their most beloved franchises, including Power Rangers Prime, VR Troopers, multiple Godzilla books, and the upcoming Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind graphic novel. They're also one of many awesome creative voices working on the upcoming anthology Samidoon, Comics for a Free Palestine. There's a lot of work that I can't wait to discuss here, so with no further ado, I'd like to welcome to the show David Mariotte. Welcome, David.
Hey. Thanks for having me, Tommy. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, super glad to have you. There's so many franchises that you've touched on that I love or people very close to me love, so it's hard to pick which one I want to start with. But as for your own preferences, of all of the known IP you've worked on, is there any one that you'd say you were like the most excited to work on going into it?
So people probably know this about me, but I'm just the right age that my first real Transformers experience was Beast Wars. And so when IDW finally could do Beast Wars comics again for the first time in a long time, I was just completely stoked. I'm really proud of the run we did in 2022, right? Something like that, of Beast Wars, and of having my own little contribution in the Beast Wars annual. I just like that they can transform into animals. My favorite Transformer is a Beast War from the Japanese series. It's Randy. I like him because he has just a guy's name, and he's made out of gold plastic, so if you ever have one, you have to be super careful that it doesn't just crumble into dust in your hands. So that was probably the biggest highlight, but something that's been really amazing about my career is that I've gone to work on a lot of stuff that was already near and dear to me, like Transformers, like Sonic. And then I've also gotten to work on stuff that I've been interested in, and it really gave me an excuse to go like whole hog on it, like Godzilla and Power Rangers. And so it's nice that there are not a lot of things in my resume where I'm like, I'm glad I did it, but it wasn't really working for me. It's just the hits.
Yeah, I did get a chance to check out your Beast Wars annual story, and I was excited that you did Rhinox, because he was always my favorite as a kid. Did you get to choose, like, which of the Maximals you'd be writing about, or, like, how much creative freedom did you have writing Beast Wars short?
A fair amount. It was really easy because it was an interesting transition period of starting to focus my attention on some of the stuff that wasn't Transformers at IDW on the time, and the amazing editor Jasmine Joyner, who folks might also know from a lot of really amazing Godzilla stuff, was taking over Beast Wars in particular, and knew of my love and let me just sort of pitch a story that we thought would be fun. The only real limitation was that it had to work within the world of the new Beast Wars comic, and preferably, just because of what the other two stories were, would be something that was more focused on the regular comic cast, rather than new or long dormant characters.
As for your other Transformers work, I was really excited that for the show I'd have a chance to finally dive into the Transformers versus Terminator crossover, which is something I've appreciated for a while and always loved flipping through whenever I'd see it at the comic shop. But the first question that comes to mind when I'm looking through something like this is how, with a cast as big as the Transformers cast, did you decide who would get to be in this book when you have so many to choose from?
That's a good one. I mean, it is always hard because there are so many characters to choose from. Some of it is you want to have some of the hits, right? You want to have Optimus, you want to have Megatron, you want to have Starscream, you want to have Bumblebee, because they're recognizable and people like them, and they're honestly a lot of fun to write because they have some of the most history that you're working with and the most ability to hone their voices in a way that like fits whatever you're trying to do with them. As per the rest of the cast, I mean, Velocity in particular was a choice from something that I tried to do in both Transformers vs. Terminator and Wreckers, and more generally we were trying to do in the 2019 Transformers run, which is I always just liked the idea that the Autobots weren't necessarily, militarized by choice. They weren't militarized by trade. Part of the team was always going to be medics. It was always going to be like search and rescue. It was going to be guys who were essentially first responders in the like cool ACAB way. And so I just wanted to choose a cast that felt notable and felt like it would really work within the world of having Terminator meet the Transformers while also being a little bit different than what we had seen in the past, and have that core of like, these are not people. In contrast to Terminator, these Autobots are not necessarily war machines. They are just people trying to do the right thing.
This book was actually my introduction to Velocity, and going off that design, like, she's quickly becoming one of my favorites. Like, I'm here commissioning Transformers art prints from fan artists, and like, I know she's a more obscure one, but Velocity might have to be one of the next I go with, just because of how cool she looks and like how much you've won me over on her.
And she wouldn't exist without James Roberts and Alex Milne's run on More Than Meets the Eye, and then later Lost Light. And so thanks to those guys for making such a cool character that I could get my hands on for a little bit.
Now, when it came to merging two franchises that have like such drastically different tones, despite both being about robots, like, how did you go about shaping how these two worlds would like intersect, or like what was the scripting and plotting process like going into the book?
It was interesting, and it was a little bit more complicated than anything else I've worked on, just because it was also something that was co-plotted and co-scripted. If you check out the credits on that book, it is plotted by me and two other IDW editor-writers, John Barber and Tom Waltz. John from many Transformers things. Tom from a long run on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Last Ronin. And so sometimes in comics, things sort of happen just because things line up. We knew that we were going to have this crossover coming up. We had reached out to a few folks. Nothing had quite panned out. And because sometimes things go a little bit faster than you expect, I was already sort of looking at the solicit text before we had a team in place. And in thinking about what that would be without knowing the story exactly. And so after a couple of quick conversations in John's office with him and Tom, we really just cracked the code of like, all right, so the evil robots of the future are the Decepticons. It's not Skynet. Skynet has been built specifically to avoid the fact that there will be an evil robot uprising in the future, but it's from Cybertron. And that simple twist and the fact that the rest of the timelines more or less worked out to put the Terminator back in the 80s and back in sort of right after the Autobots and Decepticons woke up, it all just went from there and ended up being something really fun and easy to do. Really, it was just conversations with my friends and coworkers as we built what the basic plot of it was. And then I would take a draft of the script, try to do the whole thing, send it to John. He would do a draft, usually just sort of cleaning up, making some tweaks, and then we'd both look at the final, and somehow we got a comic out of it.
Now, with the shifting in hands of who currently controls the Transformers license, I know a Transformers vs. Terminator sequel likely isn't in the cards right now, but with that being the case, would you be able to speak to how, like, with what seeds were planted there, like, how did y'all plan on incorporating the, like, Liquid Steel T-1000 in a sequel, should that have come to be?
So, it's funny to talk about the shifting hands of Transformers rights in this question, because actually more complicated are the Terminator rights. And at the time, the rights were distributed by movie. So we could only use stuff from Terminator 1. Anything from T2, anything from any of the Terminator movies was just completely off the table. So there are a few things where we maybe got a little bit more leniency than we should have in the original series. But yeah, stuff like actually doing the liquid metal hadn't really been on the table just because it wasn't covered by the license at that point.
Dang, that's a tall order, like writing a whole crossover and you only have one movie in the entire franchise to pull from. I mean, y'all pulled it off, but that does seem pretty limiting if y'all wanted to keep it going forward.
If we had had a chance to come back around, I'm sure we would have figured something out. Obviously, we end on sort of a potential cliffhanger for the future, and I'm really glad that series went where it went, and should things ever loop back around where we can do more, I will happily return.
As for other Transformers work that might have been a little more freeform in what you could do, I was really fascinated reading your Transformers Wreckers series, just because it was my first time reading a Transformers book that didn't have like Autobots, Decepticons, Cybertron, or Earth, or like any of the main staples and locations and factions that I expect from a Transformers story. So I'd love to know, like, how did you approach this project? Like, what were the expectations going in, and like, what did you get to do as far as like what you specifically got to bring to the book?
So Transformers Wreckers came from, again, sort of this larger initiative for Transformers 2019, which was we were going back to the basics. We were going back to the pre-war era and seeing really in parallel to the, War for Cybertron trilogy, Siege. How did we end up with Autobots? How did we end up with the Decepticons? How did we end up with the war on Cybertron? And what did that actually look like? And so Wreckers came out of that, and also came out of the sister series that was running at the time, Transformers Galaxies. The whole point of which was basically we are often paying attention to Cybertron, particularly right now in the main series. We know that Cybertron has had a lot of colonies and has had a bigger footprint on the world of or the universe. So what are people doing out away from Cybertron? And originally Wreckers was actually going to be a part of the Galaxy series. Is going to be a 4-issue arc rather than its own little book. But just timing and the way that the complexity of Wreckers ended up growing, we managed to spin it off into its own thing. And, honestly, the biggest thing with Wreckers was I like the Wreckers. This should not be a surprise for anyone, but I think that they're super cool, and had gotten to work with the guy who I think is still most people's definitive Wreckers creator, Nick Roach, on his final installment of his Wreckers trilogy. And I like the idea of sort of a special ops team that was going out and doing, yes, a bit of the dirty work, but also a bit of the, like, heroics that shouldn't be known about, and that would be very different from anything Nick had done or anything Simon had done previously. And the Wreckers just made sense with sort of a new lineup and a new demeanor. One of my favorite little stories about working on Wreckers is that when we were working with Hasbro on the very first cover, the Wreckers are all, for the most part, smiling and like playing to camera and enjoying themselves. And there was an email exchange where someone from Hasbro joked, "These are Wreckers, why do they look so happy?" And someone else from Hasbro took that really seriously and was like, "Oh, do we need to change all of their expressions?" And so we were like, no, it works for the story. But yeah, I don't know, it was interesting to be able to just sort of take characters that had been very death heavy and work on something that was a little bit different, and also to really get into like the state of the media and propaganda in Transformers and how things work out very differently, not just when you're dealing with giant robots, but also when you're dealing with giant robots who are on a colony world so far removed from their home planet that things cannot necessarily travel at the rate that you might want them to.
This was actually my introduction to the Wreckers. Like, that really sent me down a rabbit hole. I'd never heard of them before, and like I pulled up their Transformers wiki page. Was like, oh, these guys have been around a lot, and every time they show up, it sounds like something completely different. So that was a very fun research rabbit hole to fall down. But I'm definitely hooked on the idea. I love this concept of like sort of A-Team Suicide Squad elements in Transformers, but still very distinctly its own thing.
Yeah.
But did any of the threads that were planted in that get picked up in Transformers Galaxies?
A few things. Unfortunately, most of Wreckers and what we were working on there did not end up playing out anywhere else. However, there is a little bit of interplay just here and there, primarily with the main series at the time. So, like, at one point, the Wreckers are in a racing bar, and playing on one of the screens on the bar, the only one that's playing news, is actually a transmission of Megatron giving a speech on Cybertron in the main series. But who knows how long it's taken for that transmission to reach all the way out to Velocitron. And so there are little hints here and there. There are little bits of connecting tissue. And if things should ever, similar to Transformers versus Terminator, if things should ever line up, Jack Lawrence and I both have a lot of ideas for what would happen in a Wrecker sequel. So
now, there's a few questions on Transformers in general I'd love to ask before we get into some of your other books. Sure. But first and foremost, what's the deal with Soundwave and the tapes in his chest, like Rumble and Laserbeak and Ravage and such? Like, what are they doing in there? What's life like when they're inside his chest? And is Soundwave their mom? Like, is there a definitive answer on any of this?
So I always assume that it's the same thing that happens inside of a Pokeball. Soundwave's chest just sort of opens up and they go inside it and they're digitized, but maybe they're having a chill time. I don't know. I think he's less their mom than he is their protector and sometimes their suit. Yeah, no, it's just a fun, cute thing for Soundwave, and like there have been some really emotional arcs with him and his cassettes and what they mean to each other. Again, I will always plug everything that John Barber did, but the Robots in Disguise and Optimus Prime series, where Soundwave's a pretty regular character, I think, get deep into just what that relationship is.
Yeah, I've always wondered if it was like a reverse combiner of sorts. Like, are they part of his intelligence or sentience, like, while they're in there? Like, is there a collective element?
I don't think so. I think it's more that while they're all tough in their own right, they're also very fragile because they're so small. And so it's a way for him to just sort of, like, genuinely mama bird them and, like, keep them safe and close to his chest. And also to punish Ratbat for being kind of a jerk.
On the inversion there of Soundwave playing a mom role, I did see on your website that you actually have a minor in women and gender studies that you got in college. So I'd be really interested to hear your perspective on the intersection of Transformers and gender and like what your philosophy is on that.
I mean, they're called Transformers for a reason. Like, it's in the name. No, I mean, they're giant robots, but also, yes, from the beginning, they were using he, him pronouns. Like, gender is performative. Gender is a very personal experience, and obviously they are also performing gender a lot of the time. And so I think that Transformers has been a really amazing thing, particularly in the IDW days, just because we did get a chance to really dive into that and have trans characters for the first time. I'm sure there are people who don't, but in my mind, I don't think anyone writes RC anymore without her being trans. It just feels core to her character, and that is certainly the case in Transformers versus the Terminator. It's just, there is so much about the act of Transformers being able to quite literally choose how they look and choose how they exist in the world that I think is really, it resonates with people.
I really liked some of the exploration with that, with the concept of like being mode locked. that I saw in Transformers Wreckers, and like how that impacts people like in their role in society. And yeah, I guess that's like the inversion of like right there in the title being a transformer and like losing the ability to do that. And like, how does that affect the way you're treated by society? And I really love anytime I see a writer that gets to explore like some level of identity, gender, or like their relationship to society in a Transformers book.
Absolutely. And I mean, even the mode lock stuff is in large part a metaphor for ability and disability in the world of Transformers, because that exists too, and was something that I wanted to get into. And also, again, is one of the things in Wreckers that sort of riffs back and forth with the ongoing book and some of the things that have been happening there with writer Brian Ruckley's run.
On more of the editing side, I was really curious with the time you were working on the Transformers book being a pretty wild time, circa 2019 to 2022, with multiple books going on, touching on multiple different cartoons, and then separate books going on with their own interconnected continuity, and then crossovers on top of that with like Terminator and My Little Pony. That seems like a lot for someone focused on one line of books or like one franchise. Like I can't imagine another one being so complex with its monthly books. So like, how did you manage being the like overall editor on so many books with so many different like timelines and continuities at the same time?
With a lot of help, mostly. Also at that time I was editing Sonic the Hedgehog, which was a whole extra can of worms on top of all of that. But no, it generally was with a lot of help. The main Transformers book was a 3-pronged process. It was me, it was Tom Waltz, and it was Riley Farmer, who is my best friend and an editor I love very dearly. And so we were doing the Transformers 2019 main series together and just sort of keeping that train rolling. A lot of the ephemera of Transformers at the time was mostly me and Riley. Tom would step in on some of it, but also he was on the road to 100 and then Last Ronin, and there was a lot of Turtle stuff going on at the time too. And then in particular, the My Little Pony book, I will also credit where it's due, give to editor Megan Brown, who is now over at Oni Press and who is also wonderful. She was the pony editor at the time, and she really just stepped up and took that over. And I pitched in a few places, helped make a few things make sense on the Transformers side, but that was by and large her vision. In terms of keeping stuff straight, it was a lot. I fairly quickly found that I had the ability that I don't think a lot of people have, where I could tell most of them apart in the black and white. I didn't need to see colors to know which one was Thundercracker, which one was Skywarp, and which one was Starscream, and like that served me very well. And then yeah, it was just treating each book as its own special thing and treating each team as their own special team doing something with Transformers and trying to do a story that best served both the team and the licensors as needed.
Touching on your Sonic work, I noticed that a lot of what you did on those books and your writing focused on summarizing storylines up to that point, which I imagine is a complicated skill set all on its own, like figuring out how to condense multiple storylines into less than the size of an issue, finding the right artwork to represent those moments. And I don't think I've met anyone that's like specialized or focused on that before. So I'd love to know what your process of like condensing that was and how you went about finding like what images to use and reincorporating those into new page layouts and panels.
Absolutely. So, I find that a lot of the people who write the best recaps are editors, because we know what's coming up next and we know what's happened in the past, and we can really put those two things together. When I did the Sonic recaps, part of it was, hey, these were books that were specifically giveaways. One of them was a free comic book day issue. One of them, Tangle and Whisper #0, was essentially a free comic book day issue. And we wanted to make sure that they had something really easy and digestible for new readers to get caught up on the series and feel like they could jump in on whatever the next issue was. And so knowing what the next few issues would be, because we had to plan Sonic out a pretty far distance in advance, everything with Sonic ran through not just Sega of America, but Sega of Japan. And so we had really long timelines because everything had to get translated back and forth both ways. But knowing where things were going, I could sort of pick and choose moments that I felt were really going to be important for a larger understanding of the context of the story and get you a little bit more ready for what was coming next. We did a lot of Sonic, and there are so many super, super great moments that I would have loved to have spent more time with and dwelled on more. But it really was about, like, all right, gotta keep a lot of the focus on Sonic since it's his series. Gotta figure out what other things have really built to this point. I think for the Free Comic Book Day issue, a lot of it is very Dr. Starline focused, since we were about to get into Imposter Syndrome, and his story, I mean, we even knew at that point, after Imposter Syndrome in number 50, was going to come to an end, and so it felt important to really get that communicated as clearly as possible. And Starline's story doesn't exist without Eggman's story. So, okay, now we have these sort of three main prongs that I need to communicate the information of where they are and where they've been. Everything else that I can get in is groovy, but let's sort of narrow that focus so that people understand the essentials.
Now, in prepping for this episode and also in recently connecting with a partner that's a colossal Sonic fan, I've started to get a better appreciation of just how big and complex that franchise is, how it's almost comparable to Transformers in the various incarnations. And it's felt a little bit like connecting to my roots, since Sonic is right up there next to the IKEA shark as far as like unofficial trans icons go. But I know one in particular was like finding out there's a Sonic manga from the 90s that predates most things and like adds a Clark Kent element, some sort of trans vibes. Like, there's a Nikki in my life that like chose their name based on Sonic's alter ego, and like it's made me realize like how much that there is here that I might want to look into or cover on Transcending Comics someday. But with all of this, like all these different variations and incarnations to choose from over the years, like what's really spoken to you about the franchise? Or, like, is there any particular version of Sonic that you really wanted to work in or draw influence from?
You know, again, part of it is we're dealing with like very specific licensor restrictions with Sonic. And so when we started the IDW series, the very first thing we discussed was, okay, it's going to be brand new. It's going to be like the games. It's going to be very inspired by the current state of modern Sonic, and we'll have it be a richer world. At the time, Sonic Forces was just about to come out, so like that certainly plays a very big part in the early days of what IDW Sonic is. And then so much of the Sonic team, blessedly, are people who really know Sonic. They are people who know Sonic down to their bones. They are people who have conversations where, even with all of my Sonic knowledge, especially after having worked on that book for years, sometimes they're just like, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but it seems like you're having a really great time. And so they were really able to put together plans that felt like the ultimate version of Sonic. There's certainly a little bit of the Archie Sonic in there. There's certainly a little bit of the Fleetway UK Sonic in there. There's certainly Game Sonic in there as the main thrust of things. But it's a culmination of everything that Sonic has been and could be to really build what that series is. As per me, I mean, I like Big the Cat. I like that he's kind of slow. I like that he fishes. I like that he's a big cat and he's purple. And so, like, I was really excited to start doing some big stuff in the comics. And the first time we really got into his story was the 2020 annual, I think, which was the Tales from the Metal Virus series. It was an anthology, a bunch of creators coming in to do stories around a unfortunately timed event about a worldwide pandemic in early 2020. Who would have known? fortunately, actually, I think it was really cathartic for a lot of people to see Sonic ultimately triumph. But the lead story of that one is a Big the Cat story about where he sort of had been throughout the rest of the series. How oftentimes he was like 3 feet to the left of a panel that you did see, and you just missed it. And then a really touching narrative about him and Froggy reconnecting and ultimately becoming zombified together. It's a fantastic series with just so many great ideas and so many great influences, and that now I think has really changed where Sonic is going. It was always intended to be something that was like the games and complementary to them without necessarily being of a piece with them. And now Tangle and Whisper are in mobile games and in the Sonic Roblox speed simulator thing, and Tangle is name checked in whatever the last Sonic mainline game is that I'm forgetting. Frontiers, Sonic Frontiers. Yeah. Tangle's name checked. Like it, they show up in the background of a couple of the Tails tubes or whatever. There's a larger world that has really settled in, and I'm very proud to have played some small role in that.
Now, if there's one thing I know that unifies pretty much all Sonic fans, it's generally disappointment over a lot of the recent games, or the games overall, over like 20 years now. As a big lifelong Sonic fan, is there anything in particular you hope to see out of a future Sonic game?
More Big the Cat. The return of the Chow Garden. Like, I know what people want, and I know what I want. But no, I mean, I think that the last few games in particular, I came into the franchise at a very good time professionally, because while I understand that there have been mixed receptions of some of the games that have come out since, like, it was right around the time of Sonic Mania, and then sort of that wave after it. And a lot of those games have been really good and a lot of fun. And I really do hope that we just get to see more of the best ideas. Frankly, I really like the character creator in Forces, and the idea that I could make my own unofficial Sonic OC in game. And I just want to see that all carry forward. And then also give me Surge and Kit in a game, because they're awesome.
Now, I've got to talk about my particular favorite franchise you've worked on, that being Power Rangers, of course.
I had no idea you were a Power Rangers fan, Tommy.
Yeah, nothing could have given that away. I'm particularly interested in your involvement with Power Rangers Prime, and what the team was really considering and planning when it came to rebooting the comics line like they have, and now integrating elements across several seasons and comics and just the franchise wide, and like reinventing a modern Power Rangers team.
I mean, so much of this, the credit goes to Melissa Flores, who obviously has been on this show before and is amazing.
Yeah.
And is the writer of Power Rangers Prime, and really the driving voice of that book in so many ways. And Alison Gronowitz, who is also now at Oni Press, but who was the Power Rangers editor through the end of the Mighty Morphin days and into the beginning of Power Rangers Prime. So, genuinely, when a lot of those early conversations were taking place and they were sort of figuring out what the series was going to be, I had just started at Boom, and I was not yet working on any of the Power Rangers stuff. I knew that VR Troopers was coming, so I was sort of tangentially in the loop, but I was not really building all of the initial plans. But there is a trend in comics right now, I think, for really trying to bring in lapsed and new readers with compelling new versions of familiar tropes. It worked for the Skybound Transformers series. It worked for the DC Absolute line. If you aren't reading Absolute Martian Manhunter, it's amazing. Like, it's probably my favorite comic right now. Obviously, the new version of Marvel's Ultimate line is also that. And it felt like it was time for Power Rangers to have its own sort of version of, okay, if we can get away from some of the restrictions of what is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, what sort of stories can we tell? And I know because I was listening to this episode earlier, Melissa, last time she was on, was talking about, like, hey, I am really excited to shoot for the moon and see what I can get approved now that I'm no longer the person deciding who's and what's getting approved. And it really came out of that, and like taking it to the nth degree of, okay, so let's see if we can just have a team of Power Rangers that is wholly new, wholly fresh, that is something unlike what we've seen before. What is that? And I'm really proud of what Prime has been and what it's become. And fortunately, we're talking about this after the real big twist of Prime's first year and Green Ranger Rita, which is so cool.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have been both expecting and asking for that for a while, or ever since that 2017 movie. It's something we've wanted to see explored,
Yeah.
so I'm excited to see where they take that. Now, I know you were also involved in VR Troopers, which sounds like a really exciting opportunity, like reviving an IP like that with like just so much potential and tying it into the Power Rangers line. I'd love to hear more about like what your involvement in VR Troopers was like and the initial goals going into that series.
Absolutely. So VR Troopers very much was planned as a standalone companion to Power Rangers Prime. Like I said, when I had sort of started at Boom, I knew that VR Troopers was going to be coming up as something coming out of Power Rangers Prime, but I wasn't involved in a lot of the early Prime talks, and so I had a very interesting sort of tangential relationship at first, where I had some basic knowledge of what Prime was, but also a lot of leeway to say, well, here's what VR Troopers is going to be, and then make sure that those two things actually mesh well. And so the goal was, again, just sort of, if we have the ability to really reintroduce the VR Troopers and give them a new lease on life and introduce them to a new audience that maybe didn't see the series when it was first around 30 years ago, but now has this excitement around them from having been reading Prime. What is that? What does that look like? And so I brought on Marguerite Scott, who is a fantastic writer. You may know her from previous Power Rangers work. You may know her from Transformers Till All Are One and Windblade, which is where we had first worked together. And she just gets getting down to the core of a character and like figuring out how someone's emotional arc is also the arc of their action and is also the arc of their story in a exciting way as well as a deep, compelling way. And so the first issue of VR Troopers, which is on stands now, is very much a Ryan focused issue. Issues 2 and 3 are more JB and Caitlin focused to sort of really introduce them to the new readership. And it is something that if you are reading Power Rangers Prime, I think really deepens your understanding of who these VR Troopers are in that series. And if you're not reading Power Rangers Prime, is a super slick action comic that is a little bit a superhero comic, but is also in many ways a like tech adventure comic. Sebastian Perez and JP Jordan, who are on line art and colors, gave it such a fantastic look that I think is so different than much of what else you can find in sort of the superhero comics market right now. Lettering by Taylor Esposito is just super crispy and nice to read. I like looking at it. And yeah, I mean, it's a comic that hits high points of action and mystery and thrills while also having sort of the emotional complexity of like a slice of life manga.
Now, I got a chance to look into an advanced look at the Rita's Rewind graphic novel coming up, and I really appreciated how it kind of tied into the comics roots of Power Rangers, sometimes literally with very obscure but beloved references, and otherwise just acting on the same philosophy as the previous run of comics of like dancing between the raindrops of episodes or established media. And that made me wonder, like, going into Rita's Rewind, like, what kind of restrictions and or editorial mandates did you have on the book? Or, like, did Zoe and the creative team just get kind of free reign on what they could do related to the game?
So Zoe is one of my favorite writers to work with, especially on pitches, because I will give her whatever creative guidelines we have, and she'll just knock it out of the park. She'll come up with something that I totally did not expect and just completely blow it away. And so there weren't a ton of restrictions going into the Rita's Rewind pitching process, but initially we had very much been like, all right, well, the game is so tight. They have done such a good job with this. Is there anything where we have a little bit more leeway to get around it and to sort of get deeper into those stories and to make sure it's still fun, because you want to have Power Rangers-y action and not make it feel like it is redundant to the game that you have already played or redundant to what has come before. And so it was really Zoe who came up with the idea to have the Rangers of the future come back after Robo Rita and sort of be secret champions, helping the 90s Rangers out from behind the scenes and making sure that things turned out the way they were supposed to. And yeah, no, I think after we sent it all the places it had to go for review, Zoe had one note from every reviewer that was something that was a really quick and easy fix, and then everything else was just like, this is great, go to script.
I've got to shout out, like, especially to any fans eyeing the book, like, it seemed like the perfect sequel to the Once and Always special they did last year. I really liked how it followed up on those themes. Like, emotionally, it felt like it had a lot of payoff of things that were planted there. And I don't know if we'll ever see a live-action continuation of that story, but this did, like,
Yes.
just a great job providing a sequel in the form of a comic. So people who didn't play the game, it's still worth the read if you like the Netflix special or want to see what these characters are doing now.
Absolutely. And, like, honestly, if you're... I think it's actually one of those books that is a really good intro, even if you're not super familiar with Power Rangers, because it gets you a lot of the basics very quickly. You get to see so much cool Ranger action drawn by Tango and colored by Am Glazowski. And it's just... It's a book I'm immensely proud of, because I think it fully captures so much of what is great about Rangers in 40 pages.
Now, I know you've had some involvement in Godzilla comics as well. And historically, I feel like that's... Godzilla stories have been something that I think a lot of people have struggled transferring into comics. And in recent years, it seems like there's been a major change. Like, we're starting to see better Godzilla-related comics than we ever have before. Really imaginative ideas, or even, like, awesome spin-offs, like the Mothra book from Sophie Campbell, and, like, Godzilla Rivals. Like, there's so much good out there. And I don't know how so many people in the industry have just now, like, cracked the code of, like, how to tell a good kaiju toku story in the realm of comics. So from your perspective, what do you think is, like, the key to making a good Godzilla story in the form of a comic or elsewhere?
I mean, I think that when it comes to a good Godzilla story, the biggest thing is actually a piece of guidance from Toho, which is they aren't monsters exactly. Like, they aren't, ooh, he's behind the corner gonna get you type monsters. They are forces of nature. They are beings that exist in a way that is hard to fully ever encapsulate exactly what they are, what their wants are. They just come in, exist, and you have to deal with whatever the fallout is. And working off of that philosophy, I think we've managed to do a lot of really cool Godzilla stuff for the past few years, as well as just, like, being in a place with the license where I think they're open to a lot of fun. I loved Godzilla -1. That movie made me cry. I think it should have won Best Picture. And in so many ways, that movie is not fun, but also it's just a thrill ride. And in the comics, just that sort of, like, really taking the core ideas of Godzilla and resetting them to, okay, you know what this monster is, you have some idea of what they do, where in the world are they, and how would that play out, has been really, really helpful. That was very much the core of the Rivals series, which, again, shout out to Jazz Joyner, who started that, and I took over partway through, and then Nick Nino and Jake Williams, who is now the main Godzilla editor at IDW, finished it off. And yeah, that general philosophy really penetrated into everything that I did in my time, and that I think has largely continued until the upcoming new era that Jake is editing that looks frankly super duper cool, and I'm really excited to read. But yeah, there's just a lot of good standalone stories between like War for Humanity, Monster Peace Theater, Sophie's Mothra run with Matt Frank, and the Godzilla Monster Island Summer Camp graphic novel, which is our young readers' Godzilla story that's all Manila focused and super duper fun.
As far as your career experience as an editor goes, I'd love to know like how you've worked for two very IP focused studios so far with IDW and Boom, both often working with Hasbro properties as well as any number of other things. So I'd love to know how the two studios have differed in like their editorial mandates or expectations when you're handling these IP.
You know, it's often fairly similar from place to place and very different from license holder to license holder. One of the real blessings of going from IDW to Boom and going from having been working on Hasbro books at IDW to working on Power Rangers and VR Troopers is literally my Hasbro contacts were the same people both places. So I basically hopped off a thread one place and then hopped on a new thread with the same people somewhere else. And that was a real relief because I didn't have to establish a new sort of working relationship with them. And also, it brought a lot of trust in from the get-go. And it meant that we got to do some really cool stuff in what is coming up and currently on shelves for Rangers and VR Troopers. Meanwhile, something like, just because it's something else I edited recently, Dune is such a different experience because that's all very direct. It's talking to Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson and a very small team and just like really digging in deep with the creators who are the licensors, as well as, you know, there is no sort of larger corporate brand team that anything has to go through. It's just those guys and what they think, and that can be a real relief in a lot of ways, as well as sometimes a complication if you don't necessarily see eye to eye on something. But, you know, the nice thing about having done so much licensed work across both IDW and Boom is that wherever I end up next, I will be well equipped to tackle whatever licenses they have, because the most I'll have to learn is just what the actual system of communication is.
Now, I've heard you speak elsewhere about how working as an editor in comics has been really a matter of project management, making sure talent on books is like each doing their part of the creative process of bringing a comic to life, like on time or meeting the needs of the project, as well as like the need to be like the Swiss Army knife of comics, filling in anywhere a little help is needed, whether that be touching up coloring or like last minute lettering or any number of other responsibilities. And that, especially the project management side, really appealed to me since I am a project manager for a living. So I'd love to know, like, for those that hear about this or hear about the realities of being a comic editor and like, oh, hey, that sounds awesome. Or maybe I want to do that more than I want to write or draw or letter. What would be your advice to people involved and passionate about comics that want to find themselves in the editor's role?
Well, first off, don't get a job until I have a new job. At time of recording, I am unattached to a larger company, so please don't take my potential positions away. But no, like, I think that editorial is a really specialized skill because it is, yes, project management, but is also really the condensed version of helping everyone be their best and tell the best story possible. And knowing that for so much of what that is, it is you throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that it sticks, hoping that it resonates with whoever you're talking to, hoping they want to make that change, and knowing that, one, you could be totally wrong. You could be so far off base, and they might just say, like, no, you're wrong, David, and I'll be like, okay, you know what? You're actually probably right. And also that, like, when it comes down to it, no one will know whether or not you made a difference on a book, other than knowing what the final product is and knowing that they enjoyed it. It is a lot of being very selfless and, like, not taking too much credit for the things that you may have contributed, because ultimately what you have contributed is helping everyone else. It can be a very tough gig sometimes. It's very stressful. It is the comics job that is most frequently a 9 to 5 and feels like it, but it can also be really, really rewarding because you get to make a lot of really cool stuff with really cool people.
I know you've worked on so many of your beloved franchises since childhood at this point, but is there anything still out there that you really hope to get a chance to put your stamp on, either as a writer or an editor, before the end of your career?
That's a really tough one. I think that there are things that I still want to do, and I have no idea exactly when or where those things will line up. I joked for years, and I say joke, but I meant it. I joked for years at IDW that we should get the Street Sharks license, and now IDW has the Street Sharks license, and so incredibly psyched for them, excited for Street Sharks to make a comeback. Wish they also had Extreme Dinosaurs, but beggars can't be choosers. I really love the Persona video games, and if there was some way that I could be involved in a Persona comic at some point, that would be kind of a dream come true. I'm a big manga reader, and for as much as I've loved working in American comics, if I should find myself in my next gig doing something where I'm working with not American comics or not initially American comics, that would be pretty amazing, because there are a lot of manga that I would like to have some small part in. I don't know. The other thing is, I'm still pretty young, and I hope that there are things that don't even exist yet, or that I just don't know about yet, that I will be able to someday be like, hey, I got to work on that.
Okay, I have too many Persona fans, especially in my Transcending Comics audience, to not follow up on that. What's your favorite game in the franchise, and what usually appeals to you in those games?
I mean, probably Persona 5 Royal, though right now I'm playing a lot of P5X because it's new and it's a lot of fun. I think, actually a lot of the stuff that I have worked on, a big appeal of it is that it is about people being transformational in nature and really taking control of their own realities, and that is compelling to me as a storyteller myself, as a editor, as a guy who just enjoys things that I enjoy. And there's a lot of dumb stuff in Persona. I'm not afraid to admit it. But there's also so much really touching stuff that I think resonates with me about, like I said, finding your sort of inner self and externalizing that for good. And also, I don't know, there's cute girls and cute animal guys and sometimes funny jokes. It's a lot of fun.
As far as finding that creative inner force and source of transformation and externalizing that, what does that look like for you, David?
Okay, that's a big one. I don't know. I don't know entirely. I think a lot of the time it is, just trying to figure out what I can, like I said about being an editor, so much of it is figuring out how to help people tell the best stories they can. And so it's about looking in a self-reflective way to myself and what I like, what inspires me, what I think is good in the world, and help other people be able to better communicate that in the things that they're doing, and hopefully capture that in some of the stuff that I write too. That's a deep question.
Yeah, no, you just set it up perfectly with your loves of Persona. So I there's so much in Persona and that brand of creativity. I'm a big Grant Morrison fan, and also just this weird fringe contingent of sci-fi and comic people that have used their creativity to shape their own life, sometimes in a very spiritual way. And I feel like Persona, at least Persona 5 story, is a very literal version of that. So yeah, anytime I can find a way to drill into that related to someone's loves or what they hope to be someday, I've got to drill in. Now, as far as your upcoming and ongoing projects, the one that definitely caught my interest most is Samidoon, Comics for a Free Palestine. What can you tell us about your involvement in that project and what we can expect and when it's coming out?
Sure. So Samidoon is a project that I was the primary organizer and editor of. I also have a short 2-page story in there with my spouse, artist Rebecca Ann, who you can find online at popculturepunk.com. Just have to plug them because I love them. But yeah, it is a anthology of over 25 comics creators, many of whom are of Palestinian descent, some of whom are just allies to the Palestinian cause in what is currently an ongoing genocide. And we wanted to get together and make some stories about the concept of Samidoon, which means resistance and resilience, and I think is in Arabic, and I think is sort of a encapsulation of what metaphorically is needed right now. So it's a mixture of original fiction, nonfiction, both autobiography and biography. There's a comics adaptation of a Palestinian folktale. There's a translation and comics adaptation of Palestinian poetry. There are political cartoons. It is just sort of a catch-all book in a lot of ways of stories of Palestine and of what things could be and how people have come together already to just try to make some difference. The main funding period is over. We're currently sort of between pre-orders and just orders, though you can still get a digital copy at samidoonanthology.com, SAMIDOON anthology.com. We are the only money that is going to anyone is the money that's going to the printer for the print copies, and then all the remaining proceeds for the print run and for all the digital editions is going to the Palestine Red Crescent Society, which is essentially the local equivalent of the Red Cross, and one of the few organizations that has been able to actually do work on the ground in Palestine, as it has been blocked. And yeah, the book will be going to print in the next week or so. So physical copies I'm hoping to have start going out to folks in August, and once we fulfill all of the pre-orders, the rest of them will go up online on the website.
As we wrap up here, I always like to tailor one question of the week to the guest's particular interests, and I wanted to follow up on your childhood love of Beast Wars for this one. So you've gotten to write Transformers crossovers before, and I don't believe we've ever seen a Beast Wars crossover with anything other than Transformers titles. So if you could write a crossover for Beast Wars and any other property, what would you pick?
I mean, at one point, it wasn't entirely outside the realm of possibility that there would be a Beast Wars Sonic crossover. And I would certainly love to revisit that idea somewhere down the line. Also, maybe Street Sharks.
Ooh, that's good.
Guys who are animals with robots who are animals. Who doesn't want that?
I mean, we got Ninja Turtles right there. Animorphs, I know even had like a spin-off book where they got sent to prehistoric times, so like there's a perfect setup there.
And had a Beast Wars spin-off toy line in the 90s.
Yeah, from what I know, Animorphs toys were basically repainted Beast Wars toys with human faces.
Yeah, with really, really atrocious human faces. Bless them for trying. They included a version that was essentially the middle part of the Animorphs cover, and you don't want that.
I through my childhood, I had this T-Rex Animorph that was 3 of them put together. And so one of them was, just the middle part of a human centipede T-Rex. But like, I swear that the Animorphs toys were even harder to transform than the Beast Wars ones. Even if they were the same models, I struggled so hard as a little kid.
Yeah. No, they were... Kids aren't necessarily good at all those little, like, flaps and hatches that you have to do.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of them, and I don't know why.
adults have a hard time too. Like, my good friend Natalie has the coolest Transformers collection of anyone I know. I finally got to transform a Rhinox, which I've wanted to do since I was a kid, and I was so disappointed to see it was one of them shell formers, so hard to like get all the pieces in the right place. I don't know how kids were doing that back in the day. It seems like a form of childhood torture.
I've had that really nice HasLab Unicron in my house since it came out. I know that thing's going to take me an hour to transform, at least. I love him. He just lives in planet mode. We'll see. Eventually he'll change, but I don't know. I don't want to get my fingers pinched.
You might need to shell out for a second one just so you only have to do it once but can enjoy both forms.
Yeah. He lives in planet mode, and my Transformers Armada Unicron lives in robot mode, so I get a bit of the best of both worlds.
Now, David, do you have any other upcoming projects that our listeners should keep an eye out for? And where can they find you?
I do, and I don't know exactly what all I can talk about just yet. While I am no longer at Boom, I am also still immensely proud of a lot of the books that I worked on during my time there, and like the creators that were involved. Obviously, check out the Reader's Rewind one-shot. Check out the Power Rangers Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 crossover, because that is going to be so cool. Keep checking out VR Troopers, because I'm immensely proud of what that book is. There's another Dune Edge of a Chris Knife one-shot coming before too long. There are a bunch of really cool stories monthly in Hello Darkness. And then there are some indie comics that I am currently editing, and we'll talk about more when I have sort of clearance to. I'm working on some personal writing projects that hopefully will be getting off the ground before too long, and if you want to keep track of those, you can go to davidmariotte.com or my Patreon, which is also just David Mariotte, and find out more there.
Thank you again, David, for taking the time to join us today. It's been lovely having you on the show, and I really can't wait to see what's next for you and start following you on Patreon.
Thanks, Tommy. It was a pleasure to be here, and I'm just so thrilled to have had a chance to talk with you about so much cool comic stuff.
If the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for content you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Giant Size Violence Facebook page, preferably not on Twitter as @UltraMegaCast, or email us at giantsizeviolence@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance, and give a special shout out to artists Radio Parade and Dark Moon Home Video for designing our logo and cover photos. Our intro and outro music is You're an Ace Kid by Demon Dice from their album Alcatraz. You can check out their EP, Shut Up, Get Happy, on iTunes and Spotify. We hope you join us again next time as we continue to explore the world of tokusatsu and comics, but until then, take care and remember to do your part in preventing the spread of the kaiju virus.
Freedom can't be seen by downcast eyes. So raise your gaze up till you're 10 feet tall and shake your fist to the sky. Refuse to die or let them make you small, cause they love just to see you convinced you're just a brick in the wall. But you're not just a brick in the wall. La da 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 da.